All right. Well, welcome back to our conversation series on remote work. We are at our last planned conversation for the series. We talked about employee advantages of remote work in our last conversation. Now we will focus more on the company side of things. My name is Ken Khan, and I am the Director of Partnerships and Collaboration in Eye2Eye Technologies, where we help people with video communications. As always, I'm here with my friend and colleague, the person you really want to see and hear from.
I'm Roxanne Glauser. I'm Director of Marketing and Learning with Eye2Eye Technologies.
So, today we'll explore the potential upsides of companies allowing remote work. So, resiliency, efficiency, diversity, recruitment, and retention are the top topics that we'll be hitting on in our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm more excited about this conversation. Our original draft, we were focused on the office and just kind of the office building. So I think the shift to focusing on operational resilience, I think that's a good one because that takes more than just the physical structures into account. So that ability to shift and navigate whatever happens, whatever comes up, because that's one of the things that seems pretty consistent in our lives these days is that the unexpected, or I think the overused phrase is unprecedented. So just it's life, like things happen. So I think as we move through this conversation, we'll think about or share ideas about navigating difficult situations. Like we touched a little bit on weather events, so that's definitely one. Fire events. I had a house fire and I know how disruptive that can be in a personal life. So I can't imagine in the business environment as well. And then one of the things that I've been thinking about lately and what we saw in the research, the cyber attacks and the public health emergencies. Some of these are more likely going to happen than others, but whatever it is, there will be things that can be disruptive.
Yes, resiliency is a skill and a character trait that benefits all people and organizations, especially like you said, in these times. I mean, it's not like, well, hopefully nothing bad's going to happen. I mean, you got to be like, what's the next thing? When's it going to be? So, yes, having things set up where you can easily shift is such a win when those types of things happen, because it's like no matter how well you plan, or how well you talk about, okay, here's all the things that could possibly happen, there's always going to be something that you didn't anticipate, no matter how prepared you are. Like, we're in the audio visual side of things. And like when we go on site for an installation, we go into it knowing something's going, something, more than likely, more than one something is going to happen that we did not anticipate before he came out here. And that's after, like, meeting with the customer, going on a site visit, reviewing pictures, reviewing technicals. Like, we're doing everything we possibly can, testing equipment before we go on site to make sure everything works the way it's supposed to work. When we, mount it on a wall, plug it in, connect it up. And still, I mean, I could probably count on one hand the times where everything went exactly. And you love we savor those moments. Those are the moments that keep us going and being like, it can happen. It's just very rare. Often than not, it's like, okay, this happens. Now what do we do? How do we pivot? How do we shift? How do we keep everything in mind that we want, that's important to us? How do we stay true to our beliefs, our purpose, our core mission, but adapt to the current situation?
Yeah, as you were sharing with that, that's an example of like us going on site and working, but the idea of being organizationally resilient. I'm curious how those characteristics will play out in the organizations now that are saying we're 100% in person. Okay, so we say you say the culture is important, the collaboration, so we have to be here. So what happens when the next, if it's cyber attack, if it is some type of public health emergency that is, highly contagious, then will it be, conveniently, oh my goodness, now we're 100% telework, which is we heard that in some of the research that we were reading, some of the testimonies from people that were 100% in person. And then as soon as the pandemic hit, they're like, oh, we're 100% telework. Before that, it was not allowed, then it's required. So I think that if companies can maintain some part of their remote workforce, their remote work processes, that's going to be a huge benefit for them. And the idea of flexibility with resilience, because what we know in nature or even in buildings and things where if it doesn't move a little bit, if it doesn't have a little give to it, it's much easier to break.
Yeah, that's a great point that I don't think I've really thought about as we've been in this series is keeping those skills sharp. So even when we talked about the return to office, the RTO initiatives, um, I don't think I factored in the thought of they're letting a skill that they've learned go. And so, yeah, the people that are at least maintaining some type of semblance of remote work, like in a hybrid format where, maybe it's 3 days in office, 2 days out, they're keeping those skills sharp of the remote work. So if something does happen, they can it's like we're doing these things. We already have the system set up, the processes in place. We can easily shift to if we need to ramp this up to 5 days or not, versus like, okay, does anybody remember what we did the last time we had to do this? Like, and some of the team members being like, I just started working here a year ago. We've never had remote work while I was here. How did you guys even VP? Was there a VP? Yeah, so that's an excellent point of like keeping those things sharp, continuing to innovate, continuing to, as you learn new things, as new technologies come out, continue to improve those processes. So when that happens, it's easier to ramp it up or turn it down.
Yeah, part of what made me think of that was I was listening to one of the radio shows I listened to. I was on a long drive. Yes, I was on a drive. I was on the road, so entertaining myself. And they had a segment on remote work. So they just had people calling in remote work. Do you love it? Are you in person? Are you hybrid? Talk to me about this. And one of the calls that I remember was from a therapist, so a counselor. And she talked about, when everything shut down, and she immediately had to start doing counseling sessions through Zoom. So it was all, and she did a lot of work with trauma survivors. So she talked about the developing her skill set to be able to deliver therapy through Zoom. And she said it took her a while. She said it took her about a year to really get good at connecting with patients, noticing things. Because when you're in person, especially in a counseling or therapeutic session, so much that you can gather because it's not always the words they say, but it's all other parts of being in the same space with them. And she said now, once the pandemic was kind of over, she prefers being in person. So she is 100% in person. But she said the agency she works for does give them options. And so what she said sometimes, like if she actually mentioned a couple times where she was sick, not sick enough, like in bed sick, but knew could be possibly contagious, where they would use teletherapy instead of being in person. So she uses it a little bit, but prefers to be in person. And that's got me thinking. I was like, oh, I'd never thought about all those skills that we did learn starting from zero as opposed to starting from, even 25%. There's a big difference in that.
Yeah, and the comment you made about the counselors too reminds me of a couple counselors that I knew had the same thing. Like they were all in person, and then when the pandemic, in fact, like one of them it was a family friend, and I'd talked to her before the pandemic about the situation. She was like, yeah, I'm not really into like doing the virtual thing. I know some people are doing that. Well, then when she was forced to do it, she learned that she really liked it a lot. And then, related to another point that we have here, she decided to let go of her office space, and go 100% remote, mainly because I know one of them, the space they were renting, like they went up on the like she was in one of those multi office buildings where you just rent a space for your business, and she was like, you know what, like I don't feel like I'm getting enough out of that to justify that expense, and so she let that go, and she just does 100% virtual counseling, um, now instead of having a physical office space.
And yes, saving money on the traditional office space. And so some of the things that would fall into that, in addition to rent, electricity, just the equipment, the furniture, and even amenities. You think of like coffee, snacks, all of the things that go with that space. So that can be, a benefit to the bottom line.
Yeah, I know. When we were doing a little pre-talk about this too, you brought up another excellent point related to that, though, because I think a lot of people tout that as a huge advantage for companies of like, oh, they don't need as much office space and they don't need as many resources. But what we know that what's actually happening is most companies have some type of hybrid where people have to be in work at work, the majority of them are 3 days out of the 5 days of the week. And guess what? Everybody wants to be there on the same 3 days and be remote the same 2 days.
Is it
And so
Monday, Wednesday, Friday? Is that it?
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, office days. Yeah. Monday, Friday, remote days. So it's like, you really can't just scale back without, being very intentional and strategic about it because, you're not going to have enough space for everybody when they're in the office.
Well, that reminds me of two different conversations that we had. We talked about, I think was it the Dell where they made everybody come back and they didn't have enough parking places, they didn't have enough desks, they didn't have enough space. So thinking of that, so you can't just you've got to be thoughtful of your resources and the people that are coming in. And the other conversation where we were discussing that just letting everyone pick what works for them, that there needs to be some structure to it. So you can have consensus, you can get input from your employees, but also have some structure with that. So I was thinking, if everybody wants to come in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, then there could be some negotiation of, oh, well, you've got 2 Mondays a month and 2 Fridays or something like that to where you can mitigate some of this and use your physical space wisely as well.
I think you can be smart about this. I haven't necessarily seen anything or heard anybody doing this though, but you could optimize your workspace. If instead of having a mandate that's per week, like, maybe you do a thing where like certain employees are in the office one week and then certain employees are in the office the following week. Where if you offset your workforce, you could reduce your workspace. You wouldn't need as many parking spaces. You probably could see the benefit of saving money because you don't need all of that real estate. You don't need as many resources. Yeah. Have you heard anybody doing anything like that?
No, but that makes sense. It reminds me similar to what some of the high schools do, like a AB schedule. That's when you were saying that.
Yeah, I was thinking of that too. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'd never thought of it of like alternating weeks. Now that's kind of brilliant to where you don't have the same people there. And it also reminds me, as you were saying that, it reminds me of one of the things that you'll comment a lot of anytime we're working with someone on some type of technology AV implementation. One of the first questions I always hear you ask is, what is your intention? And so if you start from having your intentions clear about what you're trying to accomplish, then you can have the other decisions that flow beneath that all come toward that intention or that goal. That would be quite interesting to see. So I think it's part of it too is just shifting to go from everyone has to be here every day just because I say so to what are different ways we can get the most time for collaboration, where we can also give flexibility to our work staff, where we can also maximize our investment in the office and the structures that we have in place there.
Yeah, we've mentioned this in other conversations as well when you mentioned the intention. And I think that's the rub a little bit with this is when employees are pushing companies to explain why does everybody need to be back into the office, we seem to be getting vague answers or the like you shared because I said so, because that's what needs to happen. And it's like, is that the hill you really want to die on, executive leader? Um, okay, if that's what you want. But I think, yeah, that becomes the rub of like what is sometimes seems to be the narrative for the initiative isn't really what it's about, and people see through that, and that causes a whole host of other things to happen. That if you've been listening to the series, you've heard us talk about from time to time.
Yeah, so I think we've kind of touched on everything for this first one. And the bottom line is to get your intention, and you can be thoughtful to take advantage of the operational resiliency because you have that as an option. And why discount it when it can be that powerful for you?
Yes, like how can we set ourselves up for shifting easily, and how can we be more efficient even if things operate the way that we want them to? I think if companies looked at it from that perspective and communicated that clearly to employees, there'd be a lot of happy people. So next, we're going to get into some talk about employee diversity and cost and how that can be associated with company advantages of remote work.